It's one thing to do ugly modifications on your own accord because we as people have different personal preferences, but it's another thing when they come like that from the factory, because factory cars are cars that people who buy and order that specific model all collectively have to deal with upon first receiving the model. However, here are 5 ugly factory car mods that actually aged fantastically. The first one we'll talk about is the hood window on the C601 Corvette. This was criticized for being really tacky and just wannabe supercar. This is because a lot of supercars that are mid-engine will have windows that show off their engine in their fastback coupe style. And this works because the fastback style of window elevated enough where you get a nice bubble to kind of view into the engine bay, or in the C601's case, because of how flat the hood was, you just straight up look at the intercooler cover for the supercharger, not even the supercharger itself. But believe it or not, in spite of how rather useless that seems, over time people have been charmed by this existence, so much so that it's even replicated on C7s and even on Mercedes-AMG GTs. And of course, the modern way to do it is to leave some elevation from it, that way you can actually peek around and look at the other things beneath, instead of just what is directly underneath. Another reason this aged fantastically is this is a very strong identifying factor of the C601. A lot of Corvettes tend to look same, and even in the aftermarket, people tend to do the same things to them, but a hood window at the time, and even to this day, is still kind of such an absurd thing to do to C6, that really the only ones you found with them were the 01s that came like that. Because of how odd it looked in the moment and how poorly received it was in the moment, a lot of companies didn't bother making an aftermarket version, meaning that people who have the stock hood window on their 01 actually, in a sense, became far more special than every other Corvette in a very identifiable cosmetic way. Fender flares, Gumpert Apollo. I guess you can also call it a wide body because that'd be more accurate, but the Gumpert Apollo when it first came out was often thought of as one of the world's ugliest supercars. Jeremy Clarkson constantly said that not only in name but also in appearance it was way too gaudy looking, way too flashy, and just overall extremely hideous. He was not alone in this sentiment. Around 2008 when this car first unveiled, and even when it broke the Nürburgring record, people respected its speed, but they often did not like its race car styling. A lot of critics would give race cars a pass because they would say that that's the company pushing their vehicle to the limit and therefore needs every ounce of grip possible. They said that general consumers simply didn't need to have cars that wide, and that the appearance of wide bodies and fender flares would never be a thing that would catch on. Famous last words, because fender flares is one of the most desirable cosmetics in the aftermarket, so much so that factories have actually started to offer it OEM and stock again, where you can now order things like Dodge Challengers and Dodge Chargers with wide bodies and fender flares from factory, and so on and so forth. The Gumpert Apollo, now in hindsight, is now considered one of the most beautiful cars ever made. It was so beautiful, in fact, that it simply stumped the previous generation, that it stumped the critics of the time, that it just could not be understood by them. There are many things that we consider ugly in history that do indeed end up being ugly as decades and even centuries pass by, but there are also other things that we simply call ugly because we don't understand, and the Gumpert Apollo was one of those cars where, at the time, the idea of gaudy, wide bodies and big fender flares and giant wings and diffusers and splitters on a street car seemed kind of extreme, until we realized that there was an audience and there was a market for all of those things on street cars. Clear taillights. So, a lot of Europeans actually do not like the clear taillights that come on the Mustangs that go over there. So the reason the Mustang has the clear taillights is because a lot of laws in Europe dictate that the turn signal there must be yellow. Of course, if the Mustang had all red lenses, this would be a problem to make yellow shine through it because it would end up becoming orange. Now, the other solution would be to do 2 red lenses and then 1 yellow lens of each, but then that kind of just looks like ketchup and mustard. So Ford thought the easiest way to do it is to just actually give it no color to the taillights. That way the individual lighting assemblies themselves can determine the color that the bulb should show. Hence, clear taillights. And this is something that aged fantastically. A lot of Europeans to this day still kind of don't like the clear taillights in their Mustang and will gladly trade Americans for theirs. Meanwhile, a lot of Americans really want the clear taillights in their Mustangs and they will gladly do the opposite. Even without laws and regulations, people have started to do clear taillights for their own cars just because they like the way it looks, and the Mustang isn't alone in the sense that even USDM cars that don't have to obey those laws still come with clear taillights from factory. For example, my Z06. A lot of people say, oh, bladed, when did did you get your Euro taillights for Z06, or where did you get them? I'm just like, what the heck do you mean? Those are USDM taillights actually, because the EU Z06s actually came with red taillights, but the American ones are the ones that come with clear because we just like the way they look, and they actually, in my opinion, are one of the most beautiful taillights when done in a clear shape because it looks like a nice little prism and glass. It just looks nice, all right? And a lot of older cars, there's this great Facebook group called I Cleared My Taillights So They Work Too Good or something like that, and I love seeing the cars that people put clear taillights on that look unexpectedly fantastic with them. Like a Lincoln LS looks surprisingly sharp with it. And I'm gonna have to move on to the next entry before I just talk about how clear taillights should take over the world are the coolest thing ever because they're actually more functional than regular red taillights and don't have that weird candy apple red look that's extremely hard to match. Okay, this is, you know what, never mind, I'm not done with this entry. This is something child in me has always bugged me, and no one's going to relate to this, I bet. Maybe like 5 people. Ever since I played games and looked at cars in games, and in real life too, so around 4 to 6 years old, I hated red cars. For it's still one of my least favorite car colors for a very strange reason. It is because it doesn't let the beauty and curve and design of the taillight pop. Red cars, the red taillights kind of just camouflage into them from a design standpoint. Yes, the lights still work, so when you hit the brakes, I can still see them. That's not what I'm trying to say for any moron who's going to misinterpret as that. So what I'm trying to say is that the actual design isn't as appreciated as much because you just don't see the red taillights anymore. But the red cars to this day still eludes me with one exception. Clear taillights. The moment I see a red car that has clear taillights, I finally realize, oh, it was never the color red for the paint that I had a problem with. It was the taillights I had a problem with. It just looked too red to me. That is an extremely weird just tangent. So the actual entry for the taillights that ended like 2 minutes ago, I just wanted to tag this on for anyone who just maybe someone else. This is the same reason you struggle to like red too. There's no way that child in me was the other one who would never pick red because of the taillight thing. Moving on though, fake exhaust tips. So this one is gonna be the most controversial entry on this video because this is a factory car model a lot of people still consider ugly or rather stupid because they may not think it's ugly, but they do indeed acknowledge it that it's kind of wonky. But regardless of what we think, factories and manufacturers have decided this is what they're doing. At first, it only appeared on a few tacky base models, but now they're on high-end models too. The newest C8 Z06 has fake exhaust tips. The Shelby GT350 also has them. A lot of Audis have them. A lot of Mercedes have them. A lot of really every car. High performance, exotic, supercar, entry level, they have fake exhaust tips these days. And the reasoning behind this is it's easier to keep those exhaust tips clean and shiny because if it was actually connected directly where you don't instead have. So the way fake exhaust tips work, right, is they have these exhaust tips that lead into the fake tip, but the fake tip will then have drainage holes for both water and also pebbles and stuff, and also the suit of the exhaust itself. And because of how hidden and how tucked behind the other tips are, they also leave an actual gap itself. I'm gonna use my OEM Shelby exhaust to show this off of what I'm talking about. And yes, I went out of my way to outfit an OEM Shelby GT350 exhaust onto a regular Mustang GT. It was really time consuming. I do not recommend you do the same thing to yours. It does sound nice though, but anyways, back to the entry. As you can see, there's this gap that exists here, and that gap allows it where even without the drainage holes, right? This gap makes it where most of the exhaust suit doesn't even make it to the tip. Therefore, your tip is basically shiny and clean all the time. My C7 Z06, on the other hand, had real exhaust tips, and I always think real exhaust tips just always will have more of a pure look to them because you just see it directly connected. You don't see that gap, and you don't have that weird hole within a hole look that fake exhaust tips do that the new C8 Z06 suffers from, and like I said, a lot of cars do this now. But just because a lot of cars do it doesn't necessarily mean it's no longer ugly, so to speak. The reason I still put on this video is because it's aging well in the sense that we as consumers didn't want it to age well, but manufacturers have decided it aged well because they're not stopping it anytime soon. They're clearly adding it more and more onto it, which means this video alone is not just from our perspective, it's also from their perspective, because no matter what we say, it seems like this is going to become an industry standard. And the final mention of this video is the LED steering wheel. So this from factory was commonly found on Ferraris. This of course is a throwback, or rather a nod to F1 heritage. A lot of F1 cars, even in the late 90s and early 2000s, already utilized LED displays simply because it was really easy for them to find shift points, especially with how cramped the interior is in F1 cars. So much is going on, all that noise, very little space, lots of speed. You want to know instantly where you're sitting at in your RPM range, and the easiest way to do that was to add lights. When Ferrari started to put it on their street cars, a lot of people tended not to go for those options. They would actually just still choose a regular steering wheel because they would say the LED ones looked tacky, they looked overkill, they looked like child's toys. But of course, this was made in a day and age where people didn't already have giant LED things glaring at them on their interior. Yep, how did this work out for us, guys? So I understand that like on an old 2000s Ferrari, an LED steering wheel might seem a little out of place. I personally still think it's cool. I think the F1 heritage is cool, but I will argue that an LED steering wheel in modern Ferraris, or even modern supercars in general, because Ferraris aren't the only ones to do it, they don't look out of place at all, because modern cars have giant LED screens staring at you, LED dashes staring at you, LED freaking push buttons, start buttons staring at you. Everything in your interior lights up these days. There's nothing wrong with a steering wheel. It no longer looks tacky, it no longer looks misplaced, it no longer looks like it's the only light up object slash futuristic wannabe thing in your car anymore. It actually looks perfectly at home. This is one of those factory modifications that had everything around it grow due to the winds of change and the passing of time, which in turn made the actual modification age better because it no longer is sticking out like a sore thumb. Like, why do I have this bright lighting up thingy in my interior when my dash is still analog and my center console uses tape recorder and radio? But nowadays, since every car just has so much technology in them, I don't mind the steering wheel also having technology. It can get too busy. In my opinion, my favorite LED style steering wheel are just the dot ones that just go ... red line. I mean the ones that you know, have all those different colors and all those different displays and RPMs and blah, blah, blah. They've grown on me a little bit. I'll probably put up with one simply because I already ordered one for my Z06, but I do think they still look kind of tacky on grocery getters, especially economy cars that don't even have paddle shifters, so you don't shift manually anyway, so why would you need a shift light if you don't have paddles nor a stick shift nor any way of actually manually changing your gearbox? Like, I'm not even kidding, they make LED steering wheels for CVT transmissions, and I'm just like, what? Why? Because race car, bro, that's why. So I still think this can be tacky on modern cars if it's put on a car that definitely doesn't need it, where it's not useful. That's number one rule of modding a car, in my opinion, is that it still needs to serve a purpose. So I think LED steering wheels on Ferraris and most other supercars have aged well because they serve a purpose on those cars. That's gonna be it for this video though. Tell me, what do you think are some factory modifications you can remember off the top of your head that you think have actually aged better with the passing of time? And also tell me the opposite. What are some factory modifications that you still look at with disdain that you think are terrible and ugly? Comment it below. If you enjoy cars and car content, make sure to subscribe and make sure to like this video to help boost me in the algorithm. I could really appreciate it. Other than that though, thank you guys for watching and see y'all next time. Bladed Angel out.